Pero es posible.
But can the calculation of probabilities and the observance of banking regulations possibly enable bankers to comply with the withdrawal of deposits under all circumstances? The answer is that without a central bank, that is impossible. If the money is not there, it cannot possibly be returned under all circumstances. We will show that the law of large numbers cannot possibly be applied. In fact, that is an understatement. We will see that the supposed securing of fractional reserve deposits causes the seed of its own destruction, because it generates credit expansion, which leads to financial crises, when in turn confidence collapses, and people all go to the bank for their money, but it is gone. We will see that it does not matter how prudently a bank is managed. If it fails to keep 100% of the tantundum available to depositors at all times, it will not be able to fulfill its obligations. We will see that even if there is full agreement and perfect knowledge of what each party is doing, the contract is neither a deposit nor a loan, and it becomes an aleatory contract, in which only the lucky ones, the first people, can withdraw their money. The rest cannot. Who has seen Mary Poppins? What happens at the bank to the young children of one of the main characters? The president of the bank is an old codger. The kids have 2 pence with them, and the old man instructs them, "Invest your tuppence wisely in the bank." He even tempts them, as bankers invariably do. You'll be part of railways through Africa, dams across the Nile, fleets of ocean greyhounds, majestic self-amortizing canals, and the children are tempted to give the bankers their money, but in the end they do not trust them, and when the customers hear the boy shouting, "Give it back! Give me back the money!" they conclude, this bank has no money. And everyone runs to the window to make a withdrawal, and there is a run on the bank.
Give it back! Give me back the money! Take my money! There's something wrong. The bank won't give someone their money. Well, I'm going to get mine. Come along, young man. Every penny is mine.
People all rush to withdraw their deposits, but the deposits are not there. And what is the banker's initial response? They close the cash windows, in other words, a corralito, and turn their depositors into forced lenders. And you, having made a demand deposit of your money for custody and safekeeping, and to have it available just as if you had it in your pocket, you become a forced lender. And from the moment you become a forced lender to the bank, until its assets have been liquidated in an orderly way and you can retrieve your money, you lose the availability of everything you had deposited. Your cash balance goes from 1,000 euros to 0. That is why the corralito made the Argentines so very angry. As you will see, the system can only function if there is a central bank to act as lender of last resort, capable of generating or creating from nothing the liquidity necessary to save private banks in trouble. What happened in Argentina? Why was it not possible to save banks? And why was there no choice but to permit banks by law to refrain from returning deposits? Why could banks not be saved in Argentina? Because the country had dollarized, and the Central Bank of Argentina could not print dollars. Why did Iceland suspend payments? A country where banks had accepted demand deposits in euros and dollars on a massive scale. Because the Central Bank of Iceland could not issue euros or dollars. And when people went to withdraw them, private banks were unable to return them. In fact, a referendum was held to determine whether or not the money would be returned, and people voted against returning it. Why is Greece faced with such a serious problem? And that is not to mention other countries. It spends far more than it takes in, and it must cover the difference by issuing public debt. But since Greece cannot issue euros, which are the European currency and are issued in Frankfurt, Greece needs investors to have confidence in the country, and they do not. And it has to pay 8% interest, when in other countries the rate is 2 or 3%. In the absence of a central bank capable of issuing money from nothing, the fractional reserve banking system, regardless of how availability is redefined, What banking legislation is obeyed and how prudent investments are is a banking system doomed to disappear at any time. That is precisely why central banks are created. Well, in the 19th century, a problem arose. Money consisted of gold, and central banks could not create gold from nothing. That is the great advantage of the gold standard. Human beings cannot manipulate it. There is no philosopher's stone that permits us to make gold from nothing. So, since they could not make gold, what solution did central banks reach to save fractional reserve private banks? They would do away with the gold standard and replace it with a purely fiduciary monetary standard, paper currency. That was the norm José Echegaray established in Spain with his banking law of 1873, in line with what had already been done in England. A specific bank, the Bank of England or the Bank of Spain, which was private at the time, receives the privilege of issuing paper bills designated as legal tender. And that is the secret. Our private money, gold, is expropriated and replaced with paper money which legal tender laws oblige us to accept as a medium of payment. For what purpose is this done? So that whenever private banks have a problem, the money necessary to save the banks can be created from nothing by simply printing it. And that is precisely what has taken place in the last financial crisis with the worldwide bank bailout. What did the US Federal Reserve do? It created $380 billion to give to private banks and save them. And what did the UK do when its entire banking system collapsed? The same thing, but in pounds. And what was done in Europe? The same thing, but in euro. A number of European banks with very grave problems were rescued. The dilemma is as follows. To save a bank is relatively costly, but to save an entire country... So there is no choice, and that is the great advantage of a single currency, that in a certain sense it resembles the gold standard. There is no choice but to face our problems, take the bull by the horns, and adopt the reforms necessary to rehabilitate the economy. And that is exactly what all households, millions of families and companies are doing. We are making an effort to put our balances on a sound footing, repay our loans, lower costs, and tighten our belts to try to rehabilitate our finances. And if we are doing it, then there is all the more reason for the government to do it with respect to its budgets. Therefore, the redefinition of the concept of availability does not make it possible to legally salvage or legitimize the fractional reserve deposit contract. Nevertheless, the state has the power to make any institution legal, no matter how monstrous it is, and there is a factual matter we must recognize. The legal monstrosity that is the fractional reserve deposit contract was accepted in the entire Western world as a result of a historical error, the Peel Act of 1844, which we will discuss extensively later. Well, the book we are studying together in this course is devoted completely to an analysis of the economic effects which follow from the legal legitimation of an institution as monstrous, to use Felipe Clemente de Diego's term, as the fractional reserve monetary bank deposit contract.